Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another NFL weekly preview on RotoGrinders. I'm Justin Carlucci alongside of TJ Lasig. How you doing, TJ Lasig?
You know, I'm a little bit fired up today, Justin. I'm not going to lie. I was telling you before the show a bit, but yesterday, for some reason, just really got to me from a tilt perspective. And I've been doing this a long time and don't typically tilt too much anymore or get too frustrated just because I know all the things that could happen. But I don't know. Yesterday was particularly frustrating for me. Really, the whole slate changed at 11:30 when we found out that Zeke Elliott was going to be inactive. So I feel like I changed around all my lineups after that news because, in my opinion, and rightfully so, Tony Pollard became the best play on the slate. And so I switched around all my lineups to include Pollard, which is great because Pollard did well. You'd think that'd be great. But what it did was it got me off of my guy Jalen Hurts, who I was previously about to be all in on. And I was like, well, now that I have all this extra cash, I'm going to pay up for Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And they were okay. But Hurts put up the 40 burger on DraftKings, and just looking across my lineups, I was like between 3 and 10 points off the cash line in so many contests. And it was a frustrating one for me because after 1 p.m., I was sitting pretty. I had my Pollard, and I had my afternoon setup where I had Mahomes, I had Kelsey, I had Cam Akers, I had the Rams defense, like all the best plays, Emmanuel Sanders. And then I just watched as they pretty much did nothing for 3 hours in the afternoon. And Drew Brees was back and was just seemingly terrible. Had to watch them just still force the ball to Taysom Hill on the 1 yard line. Latavius Murray catching touchdowns. Oh, sorry. I just had to go on a little bit of a rant there because just one of those weeks for me. And hey, it happens, but I feel like I was so close and just couldn't quite get there down the stretch Sunday afternoon. And just a few points shy of a big week overall, and instead end up with a losing week. But hey, that's NFL DFS for you.
Yeah, the margin is 0. We all know that, and I feel for you, man. Hurts dropped the 40 bomb, and a lot of late news. It kind of reminds me of an NBA late breaking news slate. At 6:55 Eastern, Kawhi Leonard will rest today, and you're shoving in, Luke Kennard or whoever's going to be backing him up now at mid price, and it's great to pay up because you love the ceilings of the studs, but then you kind of get off like 3 or 4 guys that you had or any correlations maybe you had already set before that. But at least you played Pollard. You're not a big dummy like me, and that was my decision in GPPs. I had a Kyler Hopkins team that was pretty good. Didn't have all the right pieces. I played some of my Titans, and I'm a pretty unbiased guy as a fan, and as long as the volume and the targets are condensed to Henry, AJ Brown, and Corey Davis pretty much, then you can there's very few skill guys that we talk about that you can play both that are very high priced. For a little bit it was Lockett and Metcalf, maybe a span of 2 weeks where you can maybe full stack the Chiefs, obviously, they showed a little bit of a run game there against New Orleans, but we talked about that. If you're paying 85 for Mahomes this week he is on DK, then you need him to light it up. So it's either Tyreek catches 3 touchdowns or Kelsey catches 3 touchdowns, or you expect more than one guy to do some damage there. Yep. So pricing is definitely interesting. Hurts up to $7K now. It's probably a sore subject for you. I didn't really have Hurts in on my radar. I was just gonna fade him, but kudos to everyone who played him, and shout out to Chop from RG winning the Millie on FanDuel for a second time. I saw he ran the Hurts, naked Hurts with Hopkins run back correlation. So awesome job to Chop. Merry Christmas, early present there. Nothing like a cool Millie. Yeah, another nutso week with all the late news dropping and some of the injuries that we've been dealing with, which it's so hard to give good information on, Monday night. But let's talk about some of those quarterbacks. I mean, we have to start with Hurts. Hurts is, Hurts-Wentz drama is one of the main topics of the league. He's $7K now. Instead of jumping into a game, let's talk about Jalen Hurts and where do you stop? Is he still going to be popular? I mean, that's a significant price jump from what he was. But he's playing Dallas, and Dallas kind of stinks. So what's your initial reaction? Are we going to see some sticker shock there with Jalen?
Yeah, he's getting pretty much priced right up into the elite tier right off the bat, and I think it's deservedly so. He continued to run a decent bit last week, had 18 attempts watching the game, some of which are designed runs, some of which are him just finding that opportunity and scrambling a bit. But I think the more promising thing was that he got it done through the air as well, which we did not really see the first time out, but threw for over 300 yards, threw for 3 touchdowns. So I think it's the real deal, at least from a fantasy quarterback perspective. We always talk about the dual threats, and I think Hurts is somebody that we should continue to look at. And again, like you said, shout out to Chop on the $1 million hit, big score there. And I love what he did with that lineup in terms of the naked Hurts play, because all the Eagles receivers are just, I don't know which one you would want to stack him with. So I think continuing with the naked Hurts play is completely fine, but I love, instead of stacking him with one of his own receivers, at least correlate that game and get somebody like a Hopkins last week, this week against Dallas. Obviously we have Gallup, Lamb, whoever you want to run it back from on that side. So I think Hurts is quickly rising into that top tier, or maybe that second tier of fantasy quarterback, and rightfully so.
Yeah, 24 of 44 for Hurts, so not extremely efficient.
Not efficient. No, not very efficient, but there was a lot of – it was a pretty fast-paced game overall, I would say, Eagles, Cardinals. And I would expect him to continue to not be the most efficient, but really the reason that you're playing Hurts is for that equity on the ground, just having the upside to run for touchdowns, having one of the few quarterbacks that has that 100-yard rushing bonus upside. But yeah, he's right up there near Herbert and Wilson now. So
9 different pass catchers had receptions. Travis Fulgham's disappeared after Carson Wentz hit him up first couple of weeks. That's strange, But finally, these tight ends that everybody loves. Ertz had 7 targets, Goddard had 8. They threw the ball. I don't think they want to throw 44 times a game with Jalen Hurts. Rigor 8 targets, okay, but we'll have to see. Moving forward. Yeah, it's just strange. Ertz had 7 targets, but only 2 catches. 69 yards, some big chunk plays there. Are you interested in 7K Hurts against Dallas? First reaction here?
My first reaction is that I am actually. I think I'm interested. I may even prefer him to Russ Wilson, just because Russ has not really shown too much of a ceiling over the past couple of weeks. So I would say that, of course, you've got Mahomes and Lamar at the top end on quarterback this week in the main slate, but Hurts fits in nicely at that 7K price tag. So I think it's a good price for him. I think if he was $6,500, it would be an absolute slam dunk and everyone would have him. I think if he was more expensive, people would be hesitant, but 7K seems like a good price tag to me in terms of he's not going to be over-owned, but there's some value there. And obviously a ton of upside. Anyone that has the ability to put up 40 points on DraftKings is somebody that I'm interested in, especially in tournaments. And he could even be a guy that you look to in cash games just because of that rushing floor he's bringing to the table.
I know the Sunday night game between Cleveland and the New York Football Giants was one where you might have wanted to just gouge your eyes out watching. Solid game plan. Cleveland came in and didn't do anything special, took care of business. Biggest takeaway, I think, was really Baker Mayfield, 297, 2 touchdowns, 27 of 32. I was impressed with him because I've been pretty rough on him in my criticism in a game where the Giants really did a great job against that Cleveland ground and pound. Only let up 3.5 yards to carry here. that Giants defense is stingy, and really they couldn't sustain any drives either with Colt McCoy. And, they're giving Alfred Morris the rock, and I'm sure Wayne Gallman owners were pissed. I'd be pretty mad too. Freddie Morris, 7 carries in 2020. We're almost in 2021. Alfred Morris is like 45 by now, right? It's crazy. So I don't know. I'm curious to see Lamar against the Giants. I think that's a pretty stingy defensive unit. So personally, I think I might look elsewhere just looking at this pricing. Mahomes, I know he's the highest priced guy. I still don't know from week to week if he's priced high enough, right? 8,500. Atlanta stinks defensively. You never know when they're going to play offense, though, right? You just like Matt Ryan. That was one of my surprises. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to talk to first, but I was surprised with the way that game started. Not as surprised with the way the game finished in typical Falcon fashion over the last couple of years. I mean, how many huge leads have they blown in the last 3 calendar years by now? It's incredible. So really terrible first half by the Bucs. Came roaring back, still put up 31 points. Tom Brady was really missing in action. Quietly threw for 390 and 2 scores on Sunday, right? So we don't always know where the volume's going. So kudos to Tom Brady. Kudos to Chris Prince beer. He was one of his 6-pack plays, one of his highlights there. Tom Brady was minimally owned and a great matchup. And I can't figure Atlanta out. Can you? Because one week they're going to show up, one week they're not. They have no run game anymore whatsoever. Todd Gurley had 1 carry in that game, by the way. I know the game script wasn't there. I think Calvin Ridley's probably in play every single week now. But that was a crazy game in terms of fantasy points there. And Matt Ryan's coming in 5,800. They don't have a run game as it is. Now they got to travel to Kansas City. I know your first thoughts are probably, dome team probably plays pretty poorly outside, but if they're going to throw the ball 80% of the time again, I'm mildly interested in taking a stab at Matt Ryan, I think.
Yeah, I think this slate in general is a little bit on the uglier side just in terms of game totals. This Atlanta-Kansas City game is actually the only game on the entire main slate that has over a 50-point total. So I think that makes it appealing. Anytime the Chiefs are playing, we're pretty much locked into a 50-plus point total. I think you hit it with Calvin Ridley, and we maybe need to start considering him more of a must play whenever Julio Jones is out, because just the entire offense is going to run through him. 14 targets yesterday, went for 10 catches, 163 yards and a touchdown. So he's certainly expensive, 8,500 on DraftKings, but he's a great play and should be a nice game environment for him. I think you can also look to Russell Gage. Again, this is all if Julio is out again. Gage with 10 targets last week, went for 568 and a touchdown. And then the other big news on the Kansas City side is the injury to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I think it was a high ankle sprain and a strained hip I'm seeing. So I think he may be done for at least the regular season. And who knows whether or not he'll be able to get back in time for postseason play. But I'm sure a topic of discussion is going to be around Le'Veon Bell. And does this news mean that Le'Veon Bell steps in and becomes a bit more of a workhorse back, or is he just going to split some time with Darrell Williams now, which seems likely because the Chiefs seem to like to mix people in no matter what. But we do have Le'Veon Bell at 5,800. We know that we like to play running backs, especially running backs that can catch some passes against Atlanta. So I think that Le'Veon will probably be somebody that people are looking to go to. And I don't know exactly when the salaries came out, but I think that this could be that spot where the salary may not reflect the fact that Edwards-Helaire is out at only 5,800.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be the topic of conversation all week long. That's a pretty damn good game environment too, you would think. I was just looking up some Ridley numbers while you were talking. Last 2 weeks, week 14 without Julio, he had 65% of the air yard market share. Sunday, he had 51% of the air yard market share. So last 2 weeks, in terms of total air yards, he has 421. That's quite a bit. But you get to the point where, all right, say you want Mahomes and Tyreek. Tyreek's $9K. Ridley is $85K, the two most expensive receivers on the slate for good reason. And Mahomes $85. So you're dying for value.
And Kelsey's $8,500 now
Kelsey's
too. He even went up even more. So yeah, it's an expensive game to try and stack up. So that's why I kind of like the Matt Ryan call that you had, just because they're going to have to be throwing the ball, and he's obviously way cheaper than Mahomes. So that's a way to get some cheaper exposure to the game, and that's also why I think the Russell Gages and the Le'Veon Bells are going to need to be included in some of these game stacks, because you can't just – you literally probably can't play Mahomes, Tyreek, Kelsey, and Calvin Ridley. That might actually not be possible. So you're going to have to pick and choose what you want from that game, but definitely one that you'll want some exposure to and try to get some of those cheaper, lower-owned pieces in addition to the studs.
Yeah, Russell Gage, 17 targets last 2 weeks. Nothing wrong with that at all. He hasn't eclipsed over 85 yards in either of those two games, though. So, little A-dot problems there. Russell Gage had 100 yards in one game this year, and it was the opening week against Seattle. But, he's found the end zone a couple of times, and he gets those targets. So he could be a cheap piece for sure, depending on what side you're playing. But that is surely an expensive game, and rightfully so. And it'll be very popular, I'm sure. What else is fresh in your mind that was, a big surprise to you or a hot topic from Sunday's main slate here? I mean, Titans aren't on the main slate, but 46 points against Detroit, Derrick Henry, Corey Davis, Ryan Tannehill, maybe a little narrative there saying, hey, this is my team after Mariota balls out Thursday night. So that was fun. That was fun for me. Looking forward to seeing what they could do in Lambeau. But they're not on the main slate, but that was, something I was mildly interested in. I want to hear about David Montgomery. I know we keep bringing him up, and you keep bringing him up. And what do you think now?
Are we ready to just accept that David Montgomery might be the best fantasy running back in the league? Because – my goodness, every single week now, his last 4 games, he's gotten 32, 27, 27, and 28 DraftKings points. Last week against Minnesota, 38 carries. They gave him the ball 38 times. Went for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. And this week he gets Jacksonville, which, as we know, is one of the best matchups you can ask for. I think they're bottom 5 in the league against the run, if I recall correctly. Chicago sitting at 7.5-point favorites. And yes, Montgomery's expensive now. He's up to 7,700 on DraftKings. And the first reaction, as it's been every week, is going to be, oh, well, I can't possibly pay that much for David Montgomery. He's not good. Okay, but every single week he's getting you 30 points. And he's getting it at, 5% ownership last week, and nobody ever wants to play him. You already talked about the Titans. We don't have Derrick Henry. We don't have Dalvin Cook. Yeah, this Christian McCaffrey thing, every single week he's going to be questionable. I don't know why he would even play at this point, but he'd be the only person above him. You've got Nick Chubb as well, but I think David Montgomery is somebody you got to look to here in that great matchup against Jacksonville, and he just is such a workhorse. He's playing almost all the snaps. He's getting targets. He's getting carries. There's really not much to hate on, except for the fact that we're, for some reason, inherently told that David Montgomery's not good at football.
I can see the Twitter gifs flying in already. David Montgomery chalk season. But the thing is, if you're playing that Chiefs side, we just talked about the double stack too. Even if you double stack them, or if you want the best player, the quote-unquote best players in that game, you're probably not going to play David Montgomery with it. You probably can't. So either you're single stacking that game with Kansas City with one of the two, stud pass catchers. So I'm curious what his ownership's really going to be. People said the same exact thing last week at the 7K flat mark. Oh, I can't pay for David Montgomery. Oh, he got bailed out by a couple of big runs. That's it. 38 carries. There's a new play caller in town. Matt Nagy, a couple weeks ago, gave it up. So maybe maybe things are changing in Chicago a little bit. I just, those memes about him, about the player comparisons on draft day, and people edit them. And he has some very high praise from a lot of scouts. So maybe we're finally seeing an "I told you so" kind of thing with Montgomery here. But yeah, I'm totally interested here. Jacksonville is in the driver's seat for Mr. Lawrence now, so I can't anticipate too many too aggressive run blitzes or anything. What a shock seeing the Jets knock off the Rams, and I want to go there next. Wow, it must be tough being a Jets fan, right? Haven't been relevant since Chad Pennington and Curtis Martin, and some Lavernius Coles. I'm name dropping now, but kudos to them for playing to win. I don't want to see Lawrence in the AFC South twice a year or more for the next decade, so I'm a little bummed there. But what does that say about the Rams? Or is this league just any given Sunday at this point, right? I'm not trying to pull a play whoever you want kind of thing. I'm not taking a page out of Jordan's book, but what the hell's going on? The Rams, a legit playoff contender. People were drinking the Kool-Aid after the last Thursday night game when Cam Akers went nuts and they rolled New England. But, well, there's a clunker. So what's going on with the Rams and the Jets?
It really is crazy. That's one of the bigger upsets I can remember. I think the Rams were 17-point favorites. And like we've said, it seemed like the Jets were clearly trying to lose. So I don't know why they decided to win this game. I was just thinking, can you imagine being in a survivor pool all year and you're set up nicely? You're like, okay, I've got the Rams reserved here for week 15, home against the Jets. And then you pick them and they lose. That happened to one of my friends, so shout out to him. Sorry, bud. But, yeah, it's an interesting situation. And now the Jets are going to be playing against Cleveland, so I think it sets up nicely for Chubb, who's sitting right at that same price tag as Montgomery. So I'm not sure of those two who will end up being the more popular. But like you said, they both are likely to go under-owned because I can see people more wanting to pay up at the quarterback and wide receivers positions and save some money at running back. So looking to Chubb there as a tournament play against the Jets, I don't see the Jets winning another one. So now what? Now them and Jacksonville are going to compete for who can lose out and make sure they wrap up that number one pick and get Lawrence. So what a mess. Poor Jets fans, if there's any of you out there. But yeah, in terms of that Jets game, I'm going to continue to just not play any of them. Mims is just not quite getting much done, and just all those receivers that they always pop as decent values just because they're so cheap. But I'm going to try to avoid that. And then on the Rams side, I do not know what happened with them there. That is simply an unexcusable loss. And now they go into Seattle, which should be a pretty big game, and probably another game that we can look to for a little bit of a game stack, although maybe a little bit difficult, as always with the Rams, to figure out where to go. But plenty of opportunities there for Goff stacks or Russ stacks, and I think there's a couple different ways that we can look to stack up that game.
We're covering Sunday main slate here on the preview pod. There's a Friday Christmas game between the Vikings and the Saints. Just one game. At least have two. Like, come on, man. I don't know if the NBA is stealing a lot of their thunder with their big, I don't know. Maybe there's some conflict there. Saturday has 3 brutal games as well. Doesn't matter how brutal. RG will have a ton of content on pretty much everything for you. So we just want to stick to the main slate here for a couple of reasons. But yeah, I mean, you made a lot of good points there. The Jets will take on the Browns this week. And, the Browns are impressive. They had a wild game against Baltimore, about 8 or 9 days ago. So it was good to see them bounce back after that kind of gut-wrenching loss that they had when Lamar came out of the bathroom to take care of business. He had, double pun I just did there. It was pretty good, right?
That was good. That was very good. Well done.
it's good to see Jarvis Landry more involved, right? Like Beckham is gone, and they actually have some pretty decent young talent. Peoples-Jones, impressive. A bunch of tight ends. Like your guess is as good as mine. Who's going to get the ball between Austin Hooper, who came back and had a nice game, and Njoku. I think people have been waiting for Njoku to turn the corner for a couple of seasons now, probably. But is Jarvis Landry back, and is this maybe a game where you're going to consider him? He's typically a fairly high floor guy.
Yeah, I think you can definitely consider him. He's sitting at 6,900, and like you said, the volume has been great the last 4 weeks. 8, 9, 10, and 11 targets in each of those games. Touchdowns in 3 of the 4. Had at least 6 catches in each of them. So showing a pretty high floor and also a reasonable ceiling. So I think that you can look to Landry, and Baker in general has been putting up some pretty solid games recently. So I think you can approach the Browns in one of 2 ways. You can either go for a Baker stack and get Baker, Landry. You mentioned Hooper, who had a nice game on 6 targets, went for 541 and a touchdown. So I think Baker stacks you can certainly play here, in which case I know I just said don't play any Jets receivers, and you could run it back, but you could also just not do that because it's a guessing game with them, and there's not a lot to go around. So I would either go with the Baker stack side of things or with the Nick Chubb play. I don't think I would play Baker and Chubb together just because Chubb is not super involved in the passing game. He's pretty much a 1 or 2 target guy at most. So Baker stacks in play, Chubb in play, Cleveland defense in play as well.
I think Landry's at an interesting spot price-wise between both Rams bounce-back candidates against Seattle, who, we don't have to go into how bad Seattle is against the pass, but you have Bobby Trees at $7K. Landry's directly under him. Woods pretty high floor typically. His price is up there now, but he's in a good matchup. And Cooper Kupp, who people love to play, especially when they think the Rams are going to pass. So a couple guys in the middle there, and Jarvis Landry is one of them at 6,900. And another one is Scary Terry, who I'm more interested in with Haskins. If Haskins is the guy against Carolina, I'm jumping gears here a little bit, but Terry saw 12 targets again, a fan favorite earlier in the year because he was producing and he was looking good with those yak numbers, and he was getting some deep shots. And Alex Smith has been winning some games, but he's a safe quarterback, captain check down, doesn't like to do too much, pretty low A dot. So I think McLaurin is interesting too. In the middle there, especially for me, is if with Haskins is in. I'm really not as interested with Alex Smith personally, but I wanted to bring that up. So I don't necessarily think we need to dive in to that Panthers football team game, but if you'd like to, go ahead, and then maybe we should talk about Colts Steelers, another big AFC game.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we need to dive too deep. I was going to say the same thing as you. Notice the numbers on McLaurin as well. Definitely prefer him with Haskins. Like you said, 12 targets last week. Had an okay game, not a great one, which I think should hopefully keep the ownership somewhat down. And I don't view that game as a full game stack potential, but I think it's a great mini correlation spot where you play McLaurin and one of those Carolina receivers, whether it's Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, or Curtis Samuel. So I like the idea of that mini correlation there in that game for sure.
Pittsburgh, who plays the Monday night game against the Bengals. We don't typically talk about the team playing the Monday night game before we see it, but as we record beforehand. But that's a pretty big game in the AFC, and this Steelers game just can't run. The Steelers team cannot run the ball. They can't run the ball. We'll see what James Conner is up to next week, if he's in or out, but he's really not helping the cause much, even when he's active. Claypool's had some bad drops. Deontay Johnson is the guy who, when he's healthy, seems to get a ton of work, right? It's just a matter of him getting through the game. But really, man, look at that volume for Deontay Johnson. The whole year, really. But since week 9, these are his targets: 10, 11, 16, 13, 12, 7. And he's only had 200-yard games out of those because, like he's just kind of like the A-dot is just not there. Like, he's just kind of that, I don't want to say safety valve, but he just kind of works the middle, like works, between that 10 and 20-yard threshold, trying to, he's like kind of their version of Cooper Kupp in a weird way, I guess, in terms of what he's doing statistically. All those receivers are priced pretty affordably. Pittsburgh really needs to get back on track. We've seen that Colts defense get exploited. So I'm really wondering with, the Chiefs and Falcons in play at the receiver position and with the Rams wide outs and some smash spots there, if you can have a lean on any of these Pittsburgh receivers all in the 6K range, I think, maybe Deontay Johnson actually, volume-wise, might be my favorite. I think there's some sneaky GPP upside there. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton. Pittsburgh can't run. The Colts are very good against the run. If that defense is stronger in one area, in my opinion, it's definitely the front seven with, led by Darius Leonard there. So I'm interested in one of these Steelers receivers, maybe an Eric Ebron revenge game. I don't know. But I think someone's going to do some damage there for Pittsburgh.
I agree with you too. I think all three of them are viable. I agree that Deontay Johnson sets up the best from a volume standpoint, definitely has the highest floor of the three, and sets up particularly the best on DraftKings where we get the full PPR. We're looking more at a FanDuel. That's probably where Claypool comes a little bit more into play for me, just because he probably has the biggest big play, big touchdown upside. So I think we can consider him too. And then you also have Juju, who has also been fine and sits right in the middle. So I would say that Deontay Johnson is my preferred option and number one play, but I think all three of them you can certainly go to. And similar to what I just said with the Carolina-Washington, I love the idea of a mini correlation with T.Y. Hilton on the other side. It's in that at 5,500, who wasn't great again last week, but another decent enough showing, and he's been hot lately. Seeing some more targets from Phillip Rivers. My guy Michael Pittman, just done with him. Hate to say it, but he's just not getting volume or production anymore. So, yeah, I think that's a nice play there. And you can look to Ben too. You can look to Ben because the Steelers like to throw the ball, and he gets a decent amount of volume in. Looking at his recent games, he's thrown the ball 40 plus times more often than not. So you can stack up Ben if you want to. He's not my favorite. I'd rather get to one of the dual threat running quarterbacks, but 6,400 on Ben, not a bad price on DraftKings, and we will have to see what happens after this Monday night game too. I know that as of this time we're recording on Monday, James Conner was just recently ruled out. So I do not know what his status will be for next week, but if he's out, then maybe Snell is somebody that comes into play as well in that main slate.
Yeah, for sure. These two 4:00 games besides the Birds, and we'll get into the Birds, which we led with the Birds, but we can talk Tony Pollard, etc. Rams, Seattle. You thinking these two receivers in LA Nation are going to garner some ownership due to the matchup kind of thing?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Both of them a little bit, but they never get over-owned. Robert Woods has been more. It's always hard to guess between the two of them, between Woods and Kupp. Do you have a lean one way or the other between the two of those guys?
No, I really don't. I think for Torney is going back to Akers is kind of interesting. I just feel like everybody faves the running backs against Seattle, and before you know it, one of the tailbacks is dumping him in twice. And I think Akers is really good. He's really good. I'm kind of willing to maybe throw that game out a little bit against the Jets, right? Like, it's be like a total trap game week before their big division game. I don't know what happens. Like the Titans lost to the Bengals earlier this year in just a total shit show of a game. Like, it happens. Like, everybody's good in the NFL. Even the Sam Darnolds of the world are good at football.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just a strange one. He also had a touchdown, get called back for a hold. So I think he also had another like 20-something yard run that got called back for a hold. If you can't tell, I was watching K-Makers very closely yesterday. But, yeah, just some unfortunate luck for him. And I like that call. I think that could be a sneaky little play there to go back to Cam Akers. Looks like he saw his snap count came down slightly, back down to 61%. So, but that probably has to do with the game script and maybe not having him in on as many of the passing down spots. But if you get a script where the Rams get a lead here, that Seattle defense can get beaten every which way. So I think Akers will come in pretty low owned this week and is a nice tournament option as a part of that game.
Yeah, the more we're kind of looking at this slate and we're having some time to go through it together, there's more tournament options at running back than probably I initially thought. Looking at this Broncos-Chargers game, who's going to pay a premium for the fourth highest priced running back in Austin Eckler this week after he disappointed many? And Anthony Lynn just loves feeding Kalen Ballage at the goal line, everybody's favorite tailback. I'm willing to go back to Austin Eckler. Obviously, there's a ton of news we're going to need. Whether or not this limited Keenan Allen, Mike Williams thing is just going to be for the rest of the year to keep him fresh, we don't really know yet. Possible. But this is a guy, Austin Eckler, who you think would have saw more work in the pass game with those guys on tight leashes. The prior 3 weeks, he saw 34 targets. Are you kidding me? So, we talked about Montgomery really coming on. We talked about Chubb against the Jets. We're going to talk about Tony Pollard, who will probably be owned. Miles Sanders is there. Cam Akers, I just feel like Austin Eckler is going to be a little under-owned, I think. So I'm very much so interested in GPP, especially on DK, and maybe going back to Austin Eckler. And with all the Chiefs priced very high, you're not going to – we talked about Montgomery. You're probably not maybe going to look to Montgomery or Eckler or Chubb in that 7K range if you're targeting this Chiefs-Falcons game.
Yep. I think that's a good call as well. Eckler could very well go overlooked in this spot. It is frustrating, the whole Kalen Ballage thing. I don't know what the deal with that is. But Eckler, he only had 4 targets last week, but prior to that, 9, and 16 targets as he came back from injury. Seems to be getting in that 13 to 15 carry range. Matchup with Denver is a fine one. I don't think there's any matchup concerns there really. So I think he's a good call and likely to go overlooked, as you said, and maybe could even pair him up with the Chargers defense against the Broncos, who don't have a ton to offer offensively. But and yeah, the whole Keenan Allen situation is just strange. I think you got to avoid Keenan Allen in general. He had by far his worst game. And, yeah, who knows what they're going to be doing there. But, yeah, I like the Eckler call. I think he'd be my favorite piece in that game.
Is Drew Lock the worst current starting quarterback in the NFL? I mean, he's 5K flat. Tyrod Taylor's priced higher than him. Carson Wentz is still priced higher than him. Andy Dalton's priced higher. Gardner Minshew's higher. Nick Foles is 5,100.
That's actually hilarious.
Drew Lock is so bad. And I played Drew Lock like 2 months ago against Atlanta, and he lit it up. So if there might not be any more of a reason to lock in Mahomes this week in like cash at least or higher stake stuff. I know the league doesn't work like that. It's just what a bad game we saw him play against the Bills. Like that's the first Drew Lock game I saw. I sat down and watched like the whole thing, and I didn't like what I saw. So
He's bad.
He's bad, right? Like, what's his ceiling? He's so young, but he has some weapons there. Yeah, he has some decent running backs too. I mean, I know it's partially the play calling, but man, I scratched my head with a lot that I saw, and I don't know. So I like the Chargers defense call quite a bit.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that him being so bad is the reason that I am focusing more on the Eckler and or Chargers defense side of thing, as opposed to saying we'll run it back with Jerry Jeudy or with Tim Patrick, just because I don't think you can rely enough on Drew Lock to get it done. Tim Patrick has had some okay games, so if you want to throw a dart at it, if for some reason you're looking to stack up this game, I think you can do that. And then Herbert, you could look to Herbert too. He just hasn't really been running much. He was running a lot earlier in the year and hasn't been running too much lately. So I'd rather play like a Jalen Hurts than a Herbert at this point, and again, just take the Eckler pieces from this game and move on.
Eagles Cowboys. We talked Jalen Hurts. Big game in the NFC East. If you would have told me that Dak Prescott was done for the year and Barkley was done for the year, and the Washington football team is playing with Alex Smith coming back, and the Eagles would be in last. Not to pour salt in the open wound, but I would have told you that you were crazy and whatever drugs you were on must be really good. But this is the world we're living in, and it should be a close game according to Vegas. Here we go. Andy Dalton versus Jalen Hurts, the matchup everyone thought we'd be getting in December. So Tony Pollard's price is up. Is it up high enough, in your opinion?
If Zeke is out again, then I'm interested in Pollard again, even at 6,500. He was pretty involved, and you basically, I think Pollard's more explosive than Zeke at this point. Not to be a watch the film guy, but he just comes off as more explosive. He got 12 carries, 9 targets is the more exciting thing for me. I think he took one catch. Yeah, he had a couple of big plays, like 30, 40-yard plays that we just weren't seeing from Zeke. So I think 6,500 is still a very fair, if not a little bit underpriced for Pollard if Zeke is out. So definitely have interest there. We also need to monitor the Michael Gallup situation because I know he left with an injury and it's TBD right now on how serious that is. If he's out, it certainly gives a boost to CeeDee Lamb, to Amari Cooper as well, although Cooper has been a little bit he's been okay. He just had a tough one last week. So if Gallup is out, interested in similar to what we talked about, like playing Hurts, run it back with Lamb maybe. Or if Gallup is playing, I continue to like he's underpriced every single week, and I think he's a good tournament flyer just because of his big play upside. Seems to be getting in the end zone a decent amount. So I think there's some fantasy goodness here, but it's a weird one because it's mostly in the forms of I like Jalen Hurts, and then I like the Dallas pass catchers, or I like Pollard. So it's kind of that weird correlation of playing Hurts with one of the Dallas guys, but I think that's a nice strategy for tournaments this coming slate.
We usually close our show with how ugly tight end is and what do you do there besides Travis Kelce. This week, there's a $2,800 difference between Kelce, the most expensive tight end, and Mark Andrews, the second most expensive tight end on the slate. Maybe we were too hard on Logan Thomas earlier this year because
he's been a beast.
Dude, he had 15 targets last week.
15.
There was more people on the field, Dwayne, just letting you know. But, yeah, he's been good. 15 targets, 7 against San Fran, 9 against Pittsburgh. Last 4 weeks he's had at least 10 DraftKings points in every game and 2 over 24. He had 26 against Seattle, 10 against San Fran, 24 against Pittsburgh in that rainy, miserable game. That was an upset of the year for the Washington football team. And then he had 13 against. I mean, yeah, he was touchdown dependent in one of them, but with how ugly the position is, you got to consider Logan Thomas. It's hard. If you're not going Kelsey, what do you do? What do you do? Mark Andrews finally turning into some good games. I feel like every other game they've been missing someone due to COVID. So not having who was out this week for them? Who's on the COVID list? Did Marquise Brown even play? We haven't talked about him.
Marquise Brown.
Yeah, he played.
He played.
I
think they got all their guys back last week. But yeah, Andrews had a fine game. I like Andrews as a tournament option typically because he doesn't get the most volume, but he gets very, very efficient volume, I would say, just in terms of turning his catches into yards and into touchdowns, being pretty involved in the red zone. So Andrews at 5,700 is interesting to me, especially as the stack with Lamar Jackson. I really think a good way to approach tight ends is to just use it as a part of your game stack correlation, just because it's so difficult to unless you're playing Kelsey, it's very difficult to predict which tight end is going to go off. So I like including some of these cheaper tight ends as a part of either the secondary stack with my quarterback or part of a cheap run back. So we talked about that Atlantic KC game, right? So you got Hayden Hurst at 3,400, for example. That's a good way to get cheap exposure to that game because we talked about how you can't just play Mahomes, Kelsey, Tyreek, Calvin Ridley. Hayden Hurst gives you a little bit of openness there. You can look at either of the Eagles tight ends, again, as ugly as that may sound. Chances are most of the tight ends are just going to dud out. So it's like, how do you maximize the chances that if you do happen to hit the right tight end, that it also correlates with the rest of your lineup and can get you to the top of the leaderboards. And man, I can't believe Kelsey's up to 8,500 now. It's just so expensive. But I would love to try and find ways to play him. Of course, it's just really going to depend on what kind of value opens up. Because if you get the situation like we had this last week, where we had Fournette, we had Pollard, we had Traquan Smith, you can get someone like Kelsey in. If that does not open up, I don't know that we can pay 8,500 at the tight end position, even though Kelsey is just an absolute beast.
It would be really interesting if we had a 9K running back on the slate, right? No Derrick Henry, no Dalvin Cook. McCaffrey's questionable, and that's something to watch. I can't see him playing at this point, but you never know. So, yeah, I mean, the pay-up spots are the Chiefs, and the Calvin Ridley right now. And obviously, Mahomes is a very high-priced quarterback. But, yeah, it actually would be kind of a wild slate if we had those 9K running backs, right? Because you would just think ownerships might be a little bit scattered. More things to think about. But it'll be fun. It'll be a fun slate. And you're right, an 8,500 for a tight end.
Crazy. Yeah, we don't have those high-priced running backs. We also don't have Devontae Adams on the slate either. So, again, it's one of those where some of the people that would be the typical guys that we want to lock in on are not available. So I think we will see a lot condense around the Kansas City offense in terms of the pay up spots, just because, I mean, why not? they have such a high floor, such a high ceiling. And then, so it's going to be a matter of how can you get those pieces, but then also differentiate elsewhere and come up with the right combinations and hopefully take down some tournaments. Only 2 more full main slates on the year. Can you believe it? Can't believe we're in week 16 already.
It's crazy. I really
Time flies.
Time does fly. Anything else, TJ, before we get out of here? I had one more thing I just wanted to mention. I was a little disappointed. I want to be ahead of the game whenever J.K. Dobbins gets that 20-carry game. Thought maybe it would have been last week, especially with the lead they played with. Mark Ingram was just completely inactive. He is totally done. He's not done. Don't quote me on that, but played 1 snap the prior week, didn't play at all. His time is up. His contract's up. It's time to pass the torch. Last week, Dobbins played 53% of the snaps. Gus Edwards got 41%. Just thought maybe there'd be a game where, they don't want to run Jackson into the ground. I said the Giants are pretty stingy against the run. there's only a couple more weeks left in the regular season. Eventually, Dobbins, I think, is going to have this 20-carry game, whether it's now or on a postseason slate, maybe, if that's what it comes down to. The guy is so good. He's so good. He checks a lot of those advanced PFF metrics, et cetera. And he passes the eye test, right? He's the best ball carrier by far on that team, besides Lamar. And I just want to be ahead of the game. I thought maybe he'd have more than 13 in that game script, and was a little disappointed there that this wasn't the week for it. But who knows? Maybe I'm overhyping the Giants a bit. Maybe this was the week. He's so good. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, I'm anticipating that 20-carry game for Dobbins. It has to come. I feel like he's getting like the Aaron Jones treatment from last year with Jamal Williams is pretty good, but he's not Aaron Jones. So that's just kind of the last thing on my mind here.
Yeah, no, that's a good call. And he was another part of my frustration yesterday because I had J.K. Dobbins in my FanDuel tournaments. And exactly like you just said, after the first half, he was smashing it, 14 points, great game script. I was like, all right, Dobbins 20, 25-point game, here it comes. And then just nothing in the second half. But I agree. I think that we should look to Dobbins, and another spot where I wouldn't play Dobbins and Lamar in the same lineup, but I love playing Dobbins as a one-off for tournaments because I think the breakout game's coming. It's just a matter of time.
They do love garbage time Gus, though. I didn't break down the snaps, but there were some games even last year where he got a lot of fourth quarter run, even in kind of competitive games. I don't know what it is about him that they love throwing him in there in the grind, fourth quarter. And he's a good back too. I just think Dobbins is the far superior carrier among him and Ingram, but we'll see. And he scored. He was okay, right? He ended up scoring 60 yards or something like that. Dobbins, that is, but. Yeah, he was smashing early, so I was a little disappointed there. We'll see it eventually. And if not, I think next year, I'm curious what his ADP will be in kind of annual seasons and things like that, because I think he has killer upside in that offense. So, TJ, where can the people find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at TJL5124DFS. Continuing to come out with the NFL GPP article on Fridays. I know that you're going to have some NBA stuff going on very soon here, aren't you, Justin?
I'm excited. The whole RG team are about to pick it up. I'm going to do a lot of stuff on the weekends, it seems like. So I'm looking forward to providing whatever the team needs me for. I'm here. And we're starting off with a nice 2-gamer on Tuesday. I think there's a 13-game slate Wednesday. And, of course, Christmas Day we'll have a ton of good contests across the industry. So for many reasons, NFL, NBA, you name it, PGA. Shout out to Tambo, who had a huge $50K LPGA GPP win. And obviously, the RG team had a lot of big wins this week. Chop took down the Millie. We had some representatives in the live final. I filled in for Christy on Sunday on the pre-lock NFL show. So a lot of good stuff. Many reasons to subscribe to the premium packages we have. Great personalities, great people who know their stuff, and the optimizer, Lineup HQ is so easy to use. But my favorite tool is the ownership projections. Chris Tremino and company do such a great job, and ownerships are so integral to where to find your leverage, how to play these GPPs, how to play it all. Really, if you're not close with these ownerships, you're at a significant disadvantage. And I love what the team has to offer. I mean, TJ, even before RG, did you come to RG for ownerships? We can't stress this enough of how integral it is to being successful at DFS. Am I wrong here? Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a major part when you're building your GPP lineups. You want to make sure that you don't have too much of the chalk condensed in one lineup. I think it helps both ways too. It can also kind of reverse help you build a cash game type lineup too, right? Okay, who are the highest owned guys going to be? Right. That clearly means they're the highest value plays. And then as you're building tournament lineups, depending on the size of the tournament, the buy-in that you're working with, you want to find that right mix of, I'm not just going to play all 2% owned guys, but how can I play the 3 chalky guys that I like the most, but then find a lower owned game stack to surround those and make sure you have that right combination. So it's absolutely huge. I'm constantly monitoring it throughout the week just to make sure I have a good feel for when the cards are flipped on Sunday, what can I expect from an ownership perspective?
Awesome stuff. Well, as always, thanks for joining me. Hope you have a good holiday, TJ. And to all of our listeners, be safe. Have a great holiday. Hope you enjoyed this content. Big week in sports, so make sure you're glued to RotoGrinders and you have those push notifications on. So for TJ Lasig and the rest of the RotoGrinders team, I'm Justin Carlucci. Happy holidays and good luck.